20 and 22. So they're,
Wow.
yeah, so we have this whole kind of range.
And how do they feel about what you do?
That's good.
Yeah.
I think actually it's embarrassing, I think, for them sometimes, but like I think it's good because they can literally ask me anything.
Right.
Or like when I'm the one taking everybody to get their IUDs and I'm like, okay, let's talk about pleasure.
Perfect. That's
Right?
awesome. People need you. Okay, I guess we're live.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. I will start this.
Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Authentically Ashlyn podcast. Today, you guys, I am sitting down with Erin. This is the month of love. February is the month of love on the podcast, so I felt like it was only fitting to have a sex therapist as part of our love podcast realm for February. I have to tell you, I started telling you before we went live. In October, my assistant and I hosted something on the podcast, like a mini-series called Orgasm October. So we talked about trying different things in the bedroom. We interviewed our husbands at the end to ask how they felt about Orgasm October, and it absolutely took off the podcast. Like,
so great.
whether people were listening because they were judging or they're listening because they were thoroughly entertained, I'm not sure. But I'm like, as soon as we can talk about sex on the podcast, you seem like a good person to be that person. So can you tell the audience who you are, what are you passionate about, and what do you do for a living?
So my name is Erin, Musick, and I'm, I guess, online. I'm known as a sex therapist yogi, so that's my website and my Instagram and all that kind of stuff. So I'm a registered psychologist, I'm a certified sex therapist, and I'm a yoga teacher, so that's my kind of credentials and stuff. In terms of what I'm passionate about, like, so many things. I am a person, I'm an avid learner and knowledge seeker, so I'm always running around like, did you hear about this? And I'm just gathering all the time, so that's kind of what I'm about. But I really like being able to empower people with knowledge. I like to clear out shame. I like to like just answer questions. So many people come to me and they want to know if they're normal. They want to know if they're weird. They want to know, and it's just like, oh God, like, no, it's okay, right? And it's like they've never had anyone to maybe ask before some of these things, and I just love being able to be the safe person.
That person.
I'm not going to recoil in horror or run away or judge them or shame them. Like, just like ask the question, right? And to be able to just have really open, candid, and fun conversations.
Okay, well, that's what we're doing today.
That's fun.
So you're a good person. What made you then niche down and be like, okay, I'm a psychologist, but I want to do sex therapy? Was there a point in your education where you were like, that's it? Or did it just naturally happen?
I think it evolved over time, but I do think I had an interest early on. Like, I did take like human sexuality and stuff in my undergrad too, but probably I think it started in part because I work with a lot of people that have experienced sexual violence, and I was doing a lot of trauma work and clearing out, all the crappy, terrible things that have happened to people in their past, and then we're coming into now and we're trying to figure out, how do I reclaim this, right? How do I make this mine now? How do I create pleasurable, positive, safe experiences? And felt like, there's more I need to know about this, right? There's more that I can do to support that process. So I think that was probably the first inspiration. And then upon diving into sex therapy training, which is extensive, then there's just
quite extensive?
A million things more that you're like, oh my God.
What do you have to do to be a sex therapist? Like, you become a therapist, and then what's the next thing?
So you have to be a regulated, like, member of a regulatory body. So I had to be like a registered psychologist or a clinical social worker, somebody like that already. So trained at least at the master's level. And the program took almost 2 years. So it's a long time, and there's a set number of hours of different like curriculum and stuff that you have to cover, live conferences that you have to attend to, and then all the learning. There's my folder I think has like 300 articles in it or something, like so much reading.
Wow.
Just a whole range of topics, and then you have to do practice hours as well under supervision. So then I had 2 different certified sex therapists, both out of the States, that was able to supervise my work. So it's a lot, and one of the biggest things that is required, we have to do something called a SAR, which is a sexual attitudes reassessment, and that is a 14-hour experience. Basically 14 hours mostly of watching porn.
No way!
Yeah,
people are like, maybe I could do this.
You're like, I can.
All right, let's give it a shot.
Yeah, so it's really meant to be a deep dive into your own, like, your own icks and yums, your own things that freak you out, your own triggers. And
you have to tell someone this? Like, that's making me horny.
And you're sharing. You're like, that was hot. Ooh, I didn't like that. Oh, that made me uncomfortable.
With other people?
With other people, yeah. And so it's like very revealing,
like your own therapy.
Yes. It's a very revealing, vulnerable thing, but it does really get you,
so many questions about that.
Connected. Like, you're just like, I didn't even know that was a thing, but that's interesting. Or right? And they're just really exploring sexuality across the lifespan, right? Different types of things and niches and stuff. So a huge exploration.
You are a wealth of knowledge. So who would be your main demographic? Is it people who have experienced sexual trauma, or is it couples? Is it like relationship things? Is it sex addicts? Is it like who comes to you?
All kinds of people.
Yeah.
So I do definitely do a lot of I do a lot of trauma work, so that's a big part of my practice still.
Right.
So I do that sort of reclaiming healthy sexuality thing post trauma. Definitely, I do work with couples a lot. I'd say primarily in the area of desire discrepancy. That would be probably the most common reason that people come in, is one person wants it more than the other, and we're trying to figure out how to do that.
Right.
I work with lots of individuals too. I have lots of women that come in with like sexual pain or low sexual desire, or just not feeling great, in their bodies, struggling with pleasure, orgasm, things like that. Work with guys as well that are struggling in terms of like, performance struggles or anxiety or erectile dysfunction or just fear or whatever else is going on.
Yep.
And then, in terms of in my field, the idea of like sex addiction is like, that's a concept. It's quite used, commonly in the media. Yep. But the notion of it like isn't empirically supported, and it's rejected actually by ASECT, which is my regulatory body. So it's not an addiction. It's not an addiction.
What is it?
So we can look at it as problematic sexual behavior, or what some people might label as out of control sexual behavior, or compulsive sexual behavior.
Fair.
So some of the wording that is there, but it's that kind of term isn't in the DSM or something like that.
They're not coming to you for addiction.
So but they might self-label it as that, right? And so that's fair. So it's not up to me to go, well, that's not a thing, right? Like that, it's not, right?
Yes.
But more exploring like why does it feel like an addiction to you, right? And is it something where maybe you're engaging in a sexual behavior that is replacing behaviors you'd rather be engaging in, right?
Fair.
Or is it something that you're doing because you have an undiagnosed mental health condition, or it's a symptom of something else that's going on? So we're not looking at it as a cause of a problem, we're looking at it as a symptom of a problem, right? So that's like a different way, and I think a more effective way of working with folks like
less
that.
shame around it.
Definitely less shame. There's no confessional piece, there's none of that, and there's no like restriction.
Like I have to abstain from it because I'm an addict.
Exactly,
yes.
Right?
Okay.
So that with that addiction mindset, for substances, probably
right. I'm like, if you're an
idea.
alcoholic, you just stop drinking. If you're a gambler, you stop gambling. If you're a sex
Yeah.
addict, is it good to just not have sex?
Right,
Because
exactly.
it's a physiological urge,
Well,
right?
And it's
different.
part of it's a biological
Yes.
thing, like in your body, and,
Yes.
and it is a different thing too, because like if you're an alcoholic with a dependence on alcohol, if you just stop drinking, that's dangerous for your body. Like
Fair.
you can have seizures, like you can die, right? But you won't die from not having sex, right? So there is
some people might
too.
think they will, but
it is a different kind of thing, right? So we don't have the same like physiological dependence. But we can definitely have an experience, and whoever however they come in describing it, to say this feels out of control, or this feels really scary or unmanageable for me. Fair, then we meet them where
this is a detour question,
so,
but like if someone did say like I have compulsive sex, I need to stop, I want to stop, what would happen if someone just literally had a lot of sex and then they just cold turkey stopped having sex? Would they seek it out in other ways? Would eventually it happen, or could someone actually just stop having sex?
Well, I mean, there are folks that do the kind of abstinence thing, right? And if that's a sort of a chosen path that feels okay, then
but they'll cave eventually, right? Like people who go on the keto diet, it's like you're not going to eat carbs, but at some point you're gonna.
You might decide, and that's the thing. I think like a lot of times with really like drastic change, like with people, like I do say, is this something you're willing to do for the rest of your life? So whether it is, I'm gonna go on keto, and I'm like, okay, fine, but are you gonna eat keto forever?
Right.
Because if you don't, then you're gonna go back to
fail.
You were doing what you were doing before. So we want to look at like building a life really around like how can we have a healthier relationship with sex, right? How can we have a healthier relationship with ourselves? How can we regulate ourselves better, right? Like all that kind of stuff. So it just might be that, things went a little awry, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of coping. And I think a big part of it too is that lots of people experience so much shame, and there's a lot of like it creates a lot of moral strife for a lot of people. So the idea of like sex or masturbation and I'm not supposed to be doing these things, and then I am, and so that means I'm a crappy person, right? And so then that is...
Does that come more with the religious communities?
Definitely.
I'm sure, right?
Yeah, there's a lot that is really challenging, and I think that we see that in a lot in like painful sex as well.
And a tennis ball match of like, my body wants this, but my heart says I shouldn't do it. And
and I feel guilty, and we have all of this pressure around... We have to wait for a certain thing like marriage, which is again totally fine if that fits with your value system, but then we just have to recognize all the pressure that goes with that around who's responsible for making sure that it doesn't go too far, right? And who's responsible if you're having a lustful thought, and is that, you know, so we sometimes will learn that our sexuality is dangerous or that it needs to be contained or controlled.
Oh my gosh,
and that
so deep.
ends up being like really problematic for
Of
people,
course,
right?
yeah.
So then we have to kind of get that back to a place of like, okay, but your sexuality is just your sexuality, right? Like, and it's individual, and it's there's nothing problematic about it, right? So we just, you know, it's kind of making peace with yourself, right?
Okay.
And it doesn't mean it's free reign for you to engage in crappy behavior, right? And we see that in media, that you know, a famous person who gets in trouble is just, it's not his fault, he's an addict, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And it's like, okay, but actually you just made some crummy, hurtful choices, right? So so it's a responsibility thing, and you know, a regulation thing, and a healthy coping thing, right?
Okay.
Amongst other things.
So you talked on your website, like, you specialize in working with the LGBTQIA2S+? Did I nail it? Community, which stands for, so I'll say, because I wrote it down, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and trans, queer and questioning, intersex, asexual or agender, and two-spirited. Does that make sense? That's right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in the most respectful way possible, because I never know how to skirt around these questions, but I want to know. Can you kind of explain to me some of these terms a little bit? Like, as someone who genuinely just wants to know, like, I understand what a lesbian is, I understand someone who's bisexual, but there's more now. And so what is the difference between trans and transgender, between queer and lesbian and gay, or like, can you give some insight?
Yes, definitely. And definitely, like, I think even just recognizing that for me, like, I'm a cisgender heterosexual woman, right? So when I'm speaking about terms like this, they're not my lived experience, right? And I have been practicing long enough that you're right, like, the acronym has grown, and there's new terms and new understanding, and I think that's really cool, because it's more inclusive, and it's more capturing, I think, more people's experiences, and that's really important. But at the same time, like, my understanding of it might be different than someone else's also, right? And so, and even like in terms of specialization, like, I think we can, you know, be trained, and we can be affirming and all of that, but I still can never sort of speak to, so if I have like a trans client that's coming in and talking to me about the fear that they're experiencing about being in the world right now, I can have empathy for that, but I don't know what that's like, you know
100%.
What I mean? So it's like those kinds of things. So but yeah, so we know that, you know, it was LGBT for a long time. That was sort of
I understand that part. Yeah.
And yeah, so now when we're seeing, you know, terms like trans or transgender, right, or sort of like, you know, gender expansive would be another way of thinking about that, right? And that is, you know, generally the experience of having, say, a biological sex, right, being different than the gender expression, right, that they actually feel connected to. So you might have been born biologically a male in terms of your chromosomes and your anatomy, but that doesn't fit with your experience, right? In terms of who you feel like you are out in the world, right? So,
and who you feel, this might be a really stupid question, so sorry. Who you feel you are out in the world. So say I was biologically born a male, but I felt like I was a female. Would I then be attracted to males, or is it's so different, right? Depends, like, it doesn't matter who you show up as isn't necessarily who you're attracted to, and vice versa. So
just like so gender and you know,
and attractiveness
who you're attracted to are not
the
related,
same,
right? So you can be, you can have a few of the, you know, so you can say, okay, I'm trans, but I'm also queer, and I'm also gay, and I'm also you know, so it's just trying to sort of capture each individual experience. But so you might be attracted to men, you might be attracted to women, you might be attracted to non-binary folks, you might be, who knows, right? So so just it is that, so it's sort of the outward expression kind of thing, and then the kind of chosen expression of that in terms of like safety also around like, can I be who I am in the world, right? That kind of thing, right? So, and then that journey again looks very different, right? So some people will say dress in a certain manner and express themselves in a certain way, but they don't say pursue like surgical you know, options. Some people will, right? And then there's like hormone you know, therapies and things like that they would access through a physician. So some will go down that road, some won't, right? So there's a lot of choice, right?
Have you seen this progress more in your line of work, like compared to 10 years ago? Like, I'm assuming just from the outward knowledge I see is like, this seems like it's more of a progressive thing. Like, right?
I think there's more
people are owning it more.
There's more knowledge, and there's more permission, and I think it's neat working with folks that are like in their 40s and 50s, say, and
Right.
then they're watching young people like in their teens and 20s, and they're like, oh man, like I didn't know that, right?
I
Or
didn't know I had that
like,
opportunity,
oh,
maybe.
you know, and then there's some grief there about like I wish that I could have, you know, been out sooner. I wish that I could have accessed some of these supports sooner, right? But I think it is just something that we just learn about now, and I think like for being a mom and a stepmom to young people, for them, like gender and sexuality is just like they're very matter of fact about it. Like there's no hang-ups or judgment about it. It's just like, you know, how many genders are there? And they're like, I don't know, like it's pretty much like unlimited.
Right.
Where, like,
do you feel that that's the case? Or
I think, yeah, I mean, because gender is not a biological construct, right?
Right.
So I mean, you know, whatever fits for a particular person may or may not fit for the next person, and that's
so this
okay,
acronym's going to keep growing.
Well, right? And that's where it's
Yeah.
like kind of the umbrella, you know, under
Right.
which then people's different, you know, identities might be, kind of align there, right?
Okay.
And so, yeah, so I think that's a cool thing, right? And so that's where we have, you know, that you know, the T, right?
Yeah.
And then queer is another one, the Q in there, and we were talking when we were off, not recording yet, but just the idea that queer has been, you know, used in a derogatory manner, right?
Right.
And it's really been a term that I think has been reclaimed and really celebrated, and there's some power in that, which I think is really cool. But even what queer means
I'm like, what does it mean?
If you had 10 people in the room, they
Yeah.
might have different ideas about
So
what
it doesn't mean
right?
gay or lesbian anymore, because I thought it did, right?
Yeah, not necessarily.
Right.
It might.
Is
right?
it just mean, like, so when it's part of that acronym, what is the Q?
Yeah. Each person will have
Wow.
a different
Okay.
thing, right? So
Okay.
it could be related to who they're attracted to, right?
Okay.
But it could also be kind of for them what fits in terms of gender expression as well, right? So it could be that it's more kind of diversity around gender in terms of sort of rejecting the binary, right? And saying, I don't really feel like I'm a man, and I don't really feel like I'm a woman, and I'm somewhere in between, or,
right.
or I'm something different, right? So queer can mean lots of different things to different people.
Okay,
So,
I have a question for you, and we can cut this out because I didn't tell you I was going to ask this question. But while we're talking about what political question, what do you think about all this legislation about not allowing kids to own who they are before the age of 15? Now you see the repercussions of this as adults. Do you have opinion? If you don't want to say an opinion, I'm fine with that.
No, it's I did post about it on
Oh, you did? Okay.
professional social media. So yeah, it is to me a massive overreach on the part of the government, and I feel like it's like I find the whole thing very confusing, because I just feel like there's a lot of things that we need to be focusing on societally,
right.
like doctor shortages and homelessness and other things that are happening.
Yes.
But let's get focused on this issue. I think it is really one. If a young person is not out at home, there's probably a good reason for that. Okay, and so this can be actually a matter of life and death for them. There are kids who it is not safe for them to be out at all.
Ooh, I got tingles. Because honestly, I'm going to be honest, I didn't think about that side.
Yeah.
I was more like, the parents, wouldn't they have to know? Like, I don't know judgment for people wanting to change their gender. I just thought, as a parent, I would want to know.
Absolutely, right? And I think, like, in a lot of people, like my husband's whole, I would want to know.
I would want to
like,
know.
Well, of course you'd want to know.
I'd love you anyways. I just want to know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, so most parents that are in that place, they probably already know, right? Or if they don't know yet, because maybe their kids are working out what they're going to say or whatever.
Yeah.
But they know they're going to be met with support, right? Or seeking understanding. But if there's a kid who is really, really decidedly not showing and expressing and talking about that because it's not safe at home, now you have put a teacher in a literally impossible position to be the one to tell. I can't imagine being a teacher being put in that position.
Right.
It's awful, right? And yeah, just interrupting care for people, denying people access to health care. If a person is seeking, right, like gender affirming support, you know, through health, like, then their parents are involved. They're consenting. They're part of that journey, right? It's not as though like a 14-year-old can just go to their doctor and say, hey, you know, give me some estrogen. Like, that's not how it works, right? Like, there's a whole process, and there's already so many hoops to jump, and they've just made it, if this actually happens, it is just going to be just so damaging, I think.
So if this happens, essentially what they're saying is that if you're under 15, you cannot seek that care, period, or you can't seek it without parent consent.
You can't seek it, period.
Okay.
Unless you're already in the middle of it, from what I understand. So if you've already started it, but again, from my understanding, it is that you cannot access it, period.
Until you're 15?
Until after 15.
Okay.
We'll see. And then, and then that if a child wants to go by a different gender or pronoun at school, that teachers are to call the parents and tell them that, right, or a different name.
Wow.
And that if there's materials that are to be distributed regarding gender and sexuality, that they have to be approved by the ministry. And that feels a little bit like some other countries that control their media, and
right.
that feels really scary to me. That now, and I don't know who is the one that's vetting these materials to decide that they're appropriate.
Right.
Talk to the parents of these kids, right? Talk to the professionals that work in this field, because I don't think that has happened. So
wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for shedding light on that, because I feel like you're a good person to ask.
Yeah.
But sorry, I was like, jump the gun, give you some political question here, but if you're comfortable talking about it,
Yeah,
awesome.
for sure.
Okay, back to the defining.
Yeah.
I really want to know what two-spirited is.
Yeah. So two-spirited is originally an indigenous term. Right?
Okay.
And then so we have borrowed it, and so it really is just talking about the fluidity and the diversity of gender and attraction, and how the interconnectedness with community and with spirit and just and again, I think it's a neat thing in that, in indigenous culture you'll see history of folks, just showing up who they are, right?
Yeah,
and maybe a bit of a mixture of what you would consider sort of more masculine and more feminine, and nobody bats an eye about it, right? You're just like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine, and so it's something that has been in cultures for
it sounds
ever.
Beautiful, really.
It's lovely, right?
Yeah.
And again, that we're not restricted by any particular, we have to check a box and then do all the things that are consistent with being in that box, right?
So two-spirit is essentially, it's more of your spirituality in terms of who you feel like you are, you can be more than one.
Like your essence.
Right. Okay, I wasn't sure. I was like,
and that's again the way I understand it. But I think it's a really beautiful way to think about it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll get off this topic for now. But I was just so interested. I was so interested. So I was telling you before that in October we did this Orgasm October, and I had the relationship psychologist come on here, and I was asking them relationship questions. So I asked my audience, what do you guys want to know about relationships? But instead of asking questions about arguing or childcare, everyone wanted to know about sex. So the questions were basically circled around, why don't I want to have sex? How much sex is normal to have? Where is my desire gone? Why don't I want to have sex with my partner? The arousal, the time, the amount. Basically everyone just wanted to know, is this normal that I don't want to have sex? How much sex is normal? So can you talk to these women for a hot minute? The ones that are saying, honestly, I don't think about sex. I rarely have sex. I'm not interested in sex. What's the first step to getting someone interested in sex? What's the questions?
I think a big part is recognizing that it's normal to have ebbs and flows, right? And I talk about seasons often, that we are in different seasons. So if you are in a season of having 3 children under the age of 6 in your home, right? Yeah. That's a different kind of time in your life than when maybe you have teenagers, or when your kids are out, or, someone's in school, or someone's you've just got big stress and big things happening, right? So if you think about the things that kill desire, stress, right? Lack of sleep, illness, just being, often we talk about stay-at-home parents, especially stay-at-home moms, will talk about just feeling touched out, they're just glommed on by their kids all the time, and then they're just they're overstimulated, and it's leave me alone. So that makes sense, they're just oversaturated, right? So I think we have to just honor that some of this stuff is just, this is what it is, right? So in terms of what's normal, I think each couple gets to kind of decide. I think where we tend to get hung up is that it's when it's different. So when we first started, it was hot and heavy and all that stuff. And now it's nothing. And it's okay, but is that even a fair comparison, right? When you first met, right? We do have, there's science that talks about the limerence phase of a relationship that lasts up to 18 months, sometimes longer. Okay. So there is the newness, there's the novelty, there's a little more dopamine, there's a little, we're working at it a little more, right? And that's normal, that's part of it. And then you get into your routine, then you get into safety, and you get a little comfortable, and that's good too, but that doesn't necessarily stoke the fire in the same way that the newness does, right? So I think it is quite normal for frequency to fall off. in terms of like not thinking about it, especially for women when they're talking about it, like if you have not read Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, you gotta read it. Such a good book. It's a big book, so give yourself time.
Is it come like C-U-M?
No, it should have been.
It should have been, for sure. Like, they missed out on a big pun there.
I know. But yes, Come As You Are, so good, but it's great, and it is like written for women, particularly. And I would say probably more heterosexual women, I would say.
Okay.
But I think stuff definitely does apply. But she talks about just like the impact of stress, the impact of patriarchy, the impact of all the kinds of things. And a big thing that she talks about is the difference between responsive versus spontaneous desire. And I think normally we think of spontaneous desire as sort of the cultural standard. So that I think about sex and I want to have sex and then I go have sex, like that kind of thing. And that's not the case for lots of people, right? And so then responsive desire is more context dependent, right? And it's not like top of mind. It might be filed way at the back and we're not really thinking about it until the context is right. So maybe it's when I'm in bed and then I go, oh yeah, this is sometimes where we have sex. I like sex. And then they think about it. But they're not thinking about it in the kitchen when they're making dinner.
Do men more likely?
And so we tend to see that men are more often, in spontaneous and women are more often in responsive. But it can totally go the other way. And then I think nature's cruel joke is that sometimes what ends up happening is that women, as they get older, they sometimes will switch. And then men, as they get older, sometimes will switch too. So we'll have as testosterone is dropping in guys, right?
This is not evolutionarily, doesn't make sense.
You're like, is there a little sweet spot in the middle?
Yes. So when is that sweet spot? 30s, 40s?
Yeah, it tends to be like 40 plus. We'll see
a
lot of women starting to feel maybe they're connecting, they're feeling more
because their kids are grown.
They're like, oh, I have some time, I have some space, and I can connect with myself and my partner, and this is great. And then their husband is tired and falling asleep on the couch.
What the hell?
And they're like, what? No. So so there's a bit of a mismatch, right? So so sometimes it is just about like consciously going, okay, like what am I not tending to? What am I not making room for? And with people, I always say, what kind of sex are you saying no to? Right? So if the sex is not good sex, if it's not enjoyable sex, if it's one and done sex, if it's sex that you're not you're not having an orgasm, right? And also I think that we have the sort of standard around what sex is, and we generally it's described as penetrative sex, penis and vagina. He comes and then we go to sleep. And it's like, wow.
Wait, I come first.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Exactly. But that often does not happen, right? And then it's like, well, why would I be looking forward to that? Like, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. So
like, I do have sex like that, and I still sometimes I'm like, no.
But if you're just like, so we have to think like, okay, what kind of sex do you want to say yes to then?
Fair.
Right? And so maybe we need to spend some time figuring that out. And
I could go in so many different directions. Do you think that this lack of a desire is a disconnect from the partner, or do you think it's a disconnect from themselves?
It could be either or.
Right. Especially in that phase of life, right?
Totally.
My demographic of people listening is between 25, 45, mostly women with kids. So
lots of parenting stress and stuff. And definitely, like when you're just like, you're carrying that mental load and you're just like overwhelmed. And I do think like we've got just like generations, and I'm part of this generation, we've been told we can do it all. We can have it all. So we are successful and we have careers and we have families, right? But no one talked about the cost to us of that. And so when we have grumpy, burnt out, overextended women, it's not sexy time. You don't want sex 100%. When you're in that
and then you like feel pressure, like I should do it because that's what a good wife does, and I also want that to check the box.
Exactly. And it's like, and then I'm just like, okay, but is duty sex the kind of sex that you want to have? Is duty sex the kind of what kind of sex your partner wants to have? No, like he doesn't want to feel tolerated. He doesn't want to feel like, oh, thanks for putting the time in. Like that's not connecting.
Correct.
And so like just doing it to do it is not
for either party, really.
Like it's not a connecting experience, right? So we want it to be good for everybody, and that might mean we got to start over, right? We got to like explore. We got to treat it like it's new.
Cool.
And sometimes it's also about like redefining. So sex doesn't have to be penetration all the time.
Oh, so many experts say that.
Yeah, like
but I still feel like it is.
I know. Well, and it's very it's procreation based. It's like this is how we make babies. So this is how it counts. Or all the other things are like foreplay.
Well, it's a lot easier. Like especially under time efficiency. It's we can kiss and love and have oral sex, but it's probably going to take 45, 50 minutes. Whereas like if we just go straight to it, I know you'll probably come in 5 minutes, and then we can just go back to life.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, no, this is an investment.
Yes, it is.
Some time. But so I often talk about sex as like a buffet. That you've got like just like a plethora of different options and combinations and different things that you can do, and then it's like let's just normalize like that's okay. So maybe like sex one night is mutual masturbation and then you both go to sleep.
Right.
Right.
That sounds easy.
You know, it's like, you good?
Yep.
Okay, some cuddles, some sweets, and then you go to sleep, right?
Perfect.
Or sometimes it's giving or receiving, and then the other, right? Like, so there's so many different ways, and it doesn't have to be just this one way.
Right.
And I think when we can let go of some of that, it takes a lot of that pressure off and that stress around like, oh, we're not doing it enough, or I'm not doing it right, or I'm not, like that kind of thing. And yes, the women coming first, very important.
Guys, like, once you've come, we don't want it anymore.
Prioritize the pleasure, right?
No one wants a flaccid penis after that.
Well, and the female body has amazing potential, right? Because you can have multiple orgasms. And it's magical. So
it only makes sense.
It
does.
So make some room for it. Yeah.
Okay, so as a sex therapist, if someone's like, I need to connect more with my partner because I think this is our thing, or I need to connect more with myself because I think this is my thing, what would be like top tip for connecting with your partner, maybe top tip for connecting with yourself?
Yeah. I think for a partner, I'm like talk to and get close and touch each other, right? Like we start to get to where like they're sitting on one couch and you're sitting on the other, and just like we learn when we have babies, skin to skin contact, oxytocin, bonding. Well, we need that with our partners too. It's like, go touch them, cuddle with them, sit next to them, right? Like,
I don't want to touch you because then you'll want to fuck me. I'm just like, wait, I'm not trying to initiate.
What does that mean? Right? Yeah, exactly. But just like hang out with each other, and then maybe you also might be like, oh, you're kind of handsome. Oh, then you might notice that. Where if you're over there going, oh. Like
I'm doing the dishes and you're sitting on the couch and then you want to bang.
Yeah. So that's a big thing. And for guys, like and women, like everybody, but like it is that idea that sex doesn't just start in the bedroom. Like it is context dependent, especially if we're dealing with responsive desire. So if you want the lights on for her, right? Dishes are done, kids are in bed, sheets are clean, everything smells good, like it's done, right? And then she can be like, oh, now I have some space, and it can move up to the front, right? So we need that. And connection with self, like I often tell people just to like slow down, right? Slow down.
Even you saying that, my shoulders drop.
Yeah, you're just like, oh, like connect with your senses. Slow, like when you put lotion on your body, pick one that smells really good and put it on slow. Just take your time, right? Because we're always just like slap it on and go, right? And so if we're rushed and frantic, we're not in a receptive state. We're not in an enjoying state, right? So that's a big thing.
Hashtag self-care.
Yeah, exactly. Just slow down. Just enjoy your food. Drink your coffee and be like, yum, like that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And I think that is with today's society of women. I will note that a lot of people listening to this podcast are like a little bit of fitness because that's who I am. Yeah. And that's my advice for fitness too. Not every time in your life are you going to be able to put 5 days a week for an hour a day into the gym. Some months you had a kid, you're going to do yoga on the floor 3 days a week. That's what you're able to do, and it doesn't make you not an athlete. It doesn't make you unfit. It's just a different season. So same thing with sex, I guess. Okay, cool. It's funny because I told my husband, hey, I'm interviewing a sex therapist. I was doing my makeup this morning. I'm like, what would you ask her? And so he actually had a question, so I added it. He's like, oh, I have a question. How important is it to switch up your sex routine even though that you have your favorites? So how do you test the waters? Obviously he's talking about us. How do we test the waters if we've been together for a decade? Like, I know that she likes this. I know it works. I know it gets her off. So like, why would I try to change things? But is it important that I try to change things or force her into discomfort? Like try something else?
Yeah, well, novelty does keep, some spice going, right? And I think it is also, I get the communication piece around that to be able to, so like say you're in the middle of like, okay, it's Thursday night, this is when we have sex, and then you decide to like switch it up right in the moment without telling her that you're going to switch it up. Why? It's like, what are you doing? Why are you over there? Like, don't do that.
Did you watch some weird porn today or something? Good idea.
So ahead of time, it might be like, hey, you wanna try something, right? Like that kind of thing. So everybody knows it's coming, and it's
literally,
actually, right? I was like, and we're gonna like, let's try it this way, right? But I mean, there's something to spontaneity too. That's okay, right? So if you've got some time,
which we never do, but
I do recommend, switch it up a little bit, experiment, explore, be curious, right? Because even just like, women's bodies particularly change, right? So what felt good 5 years ago might not feel good now, right? Where you are in your menstrual cycle will change your cervical position, and sometimes deep penetration feels good, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes your clitoris is like, blah. Sometimes you're like, yes, please, right? So totally. So even just depending on any particular day, like it might work.
You might not know what you like until you have it.
Yeah, so you go play around a little bit.
Do it more than once.
And there's lots of spots on our bodies that can be really pleasing and erotic outside of genitals too, right? So like just playing with bodies too, right?
Cool. And that's like what? Like where would be an area that you're like
earlobes, elbows, Sometimes. Yeah, people can have orgasms with all kinds of places on their bodies.
No way, an elbow orgasm.
Yeah, nipple orgasms. That's a very common thing. Actually.
I am insecure about my boobs, so I used to have implants, like big boobs. So then I was like, oh yeah, look at me, like I'll ride it, I'm on top, like there. And then I got my implants out, and then I'm like, oh, I'm still insecure, and so now I'm like, oh, I just like to do it from the back. Like you can't own it the same, you know?
Yeah.
Because you have that. Body image layer, and like I'm very body image positive. I mean, I love my body. I work out for a living essentially, and even I have those hesitations. So I can't imagine people who aren't like that would be a very hard piece of sex.
It is, and that is a definitely, and I think some of that is building some safety around, like, so if that's more of self-love practices, right, or if it's like just doing like, okay, so you don't want to do it with the lights on, or you don't want to do it, like whatever, that's okay, but yeah, kind of plugging like,
men
into
are so
like
visual.
your body and your beauty, right, and there's so much that like we as women, we compare and we get all stressy, we think we need to look a certain way, and like they don't care, like you know, like
right. That's
really
what people say.
Care.
Like men aren't
like,
really.
They're like it's fine.
Yeah,
like, you know, like,
you're my partner. I want to bang.
I love you. It's good. Like let's go.
I love it. Yeah. So when couples come to see you together, say to I'm like using air quotes to fix their sex life, what would be like some common issues that they're facing, and then what would be maybe some homework that you'd assign to these couples?
Yeah. So most common is that desire discrepancy. So one person wants it more than the other, or they're on a journey through, like, say she's had painful sex for either post baby or just at the beginning or whatever's going on,
right?
And so they're trying to like re-engage, you know, safely, and he's scared and like all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Or there's just been a drought, something has happened, and then sometimes it's like if there's been like an affair or like betrayal or like
trust
some
issues.
sort of rupture in the trust, right? So there's rebuilding there. So so really when I'm trying to get them, you know, reconnected is like I try to get them to be more comfortable speaking, right? We have lots of men in the world that have been sort of socialized to do the happy wife, happy life thing, and they don't say anything, and they're always afraid they're going to get in trouble. And then women will sometimes make that worse by
if they do say something,
so they speak up, and then you're like, you know, getting mad. So I'm like, okay, so to undo this dynamic, you both have work to do.
Right.
You know, I want you to speak up, and I, you know, yes, packaging is important, and be respectful and kind in what you say, but be honest about what's going on for you, and this is true for both of them. And then for the other person, I need you to be able to safely receive that, right? Because if you want them to talk to you, you have to make it safe for them to talk to you. Right. If they talk to you and then you're like, what the hell, every time,
I'm offended.
Well, then why are they going to say anything to you, right? Like that's not going to work. So you have to make it safe, just to say, even if it's something that you might not like, right?
Right. So do they feel safe when they're in your office, or are these conversations they're supposed to have on their own?
Well, both. So they can practice, and it's funny. Like I could get to watch, like
see the woman's reaction.
Yeah, or I'll watch him say something, and then he'll kind of like wince, like he's afraid, like something's gonna happen.
Right.
And then she like handles it. I'm like, yes, okay.
Right.
You know, so like just teaching them how to do that. Getting comfortable using like actual sexual terms is another one, because everybody uses weird euphemisms and baby talk and things like that. I'm like, just
can you give some examples?
Call it what it is. Well, you know, like just even just like
doing it doggy.
Doing it, you know. Like, do you wanna get busy? You know, like don't touch my, you know, like I've heard like just the weirdest.
The names for
like,
vaginas.
Yeah, like just weird. And I'm like, it's actually like the whole thing is your vulva. That's fine. The inner part, is your vagina. It might be weird to be like, hey, come get my vagina. That doesn't sound very sexy.
No, it doesn't.
You know, it's fine. So you might use other words, and that's fine. But just the like when we're communicating, even in a non-sexual context, to say, hey, when you touch me here, this feels good. Can we just use the words, right?
Right.
Like, I like it when you touch my outer lips. I like it when you touch my clitoris this way, like that kind of thing, right? So just being explicit about this is the kind of touch I prefer. Right.
That's hard to speak up. I can see that, especially if you have shame around what makes, like, say a guy, he's like really wants, say, I don't know, like a threesome, right? Yeah. How hard would that be to tell your partner, because you don't want them to get offended, but you're like, oh, I have this desire, but I should communicate with my partner. That's kind of what I'm thinking in my mind when you're like communicating that. Yeah. I don't know if I really had a desire to have sex with another guy. I don't, by the way, but if I did, I don't know if I'd want to tell my husband that.
Well, and I think like that. So I think when we're talking about like communication with our partners, then we're generally talking about like the things that we are doing together or things that we would like to do together. At the same time, there's definitely room for discussion of like fantasies and things like that, if that fits, right? But at the same time, like your sexuality is your own, right? So like your own fantasies, your own stuff that gets you going, like that's personal. So you share it or you don't, right? And I think that there is sometimes this idea that like full disclosure within marriage, right? And it's like like, is that,
Right.
like, do you want to know details about every past sexual partner?
Hell no.
I don't know that.
No,
right? Like,
hell no, I don't.
So there's some of that stuff that I think does make it messy, and then we
Right.
feel like we're entitled to that information, and it's like, well, I don't know, right? And so, but it, you know, if you're in a spot where both you and your partner are in a receptive place to explore, even discussing, you know, kinks, fantasies,
Yes.
things like that. Even if there's no intent, right?
Right.
So, like, the most common sexual fantasy for men is a threesome,
Right.
Group sex,
Yeah.
right? The number of people that actually do it versus the people that think about it,
Right.
very different, right?
Fair.
And that's fine, right? Like, that's okay.
Yes.
So sometimes it's just the idea of it that's hot, and it's like, no, I don't actually want to do that. That sounds
Right. You can watch
complicated.
porn or something and
like,
pretend.
just, like the idea of it, right? You're like,
Yeah.
no, I don't actually want to do that. That sounds like too much work. I don't want to,
Right.
right? So that's okay.
Fair.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the relationship issues are the same in like homosexual relationships, heterosexual relationships? Are they the same, or is it drastically different?
I think we can see a lot of the same common threads, right? Is that if, you know, we're not communicating openly, we've got built up resentment, we've got maybe like a disproportionate kind of division of labor going on at home that can build resentment or distance. Again, frequency of sex is always going to be a thing that people are going to be talking about because we have different expectations or ideas. And so I think some of those, you know, kind of common things, I think happen across.
Relationships are relationships, right?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Fair. What about porn? So porn solo as a couple, that it's become so much more accessible. It's become so much more like graphic, more.
Yeah.
So from experience, would you say that this high definition accessibility to porn has been a detriment to modern day sex lives, or has it potentially been a gateway for more learning, for more exploring, for connection piece for a relationship?
Right. Yeah, I think porn is like one of those hot button issues because it brings in the morality piece and it freaks out people.
So I had to
right?
ask.
Yeah, it kind of freak them out, and that's fair. Like, that's okay, because there is again like a religious part sometimes that also comes in, and certainly in Southern Alberta I see this a lot where pornography is bad because it's temptation. Some people see it as cheating. Some people see it as, like, there's all kinds of layers to that. And again, that's a personal journey in terms of your own exploration of and definition of what that is.
Right.
And then there's sort of the ethics of porn, and so, you know, we certainly have seen, I think Netflix documentaries have done a great job at like highlighting some of the problematic parts of pornography in terms of you know, not doing age verifications and making sure that, like, you know, people under 18 are safe and like all of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you know, people that are performing, that are, you know, doing this to make money, like they're working in an industry, right? And so they deserve also to be fairly compensated for the work that they do. So like it's a tricky thing. So I think, you know, if we're supporting ethical pornography companies, you know, then generally that's paid, right? Like we're paying for a production company to make a product. Right, and there's a lot of you know, female-owned, you know, pornography studios, right?
Yes.
And you know, those videos tend to have a bit more storyline.
Yeah, I had a girl who that's her dream, is to run her own ethical porn company on the podcast, and her interview was really good.
So cool. So there is definitely that. So porn can definitely be a great addition. I think that where couples go wrong is that, again, we're not communicating about it, right? So we don't have a discussion ahead of time about how do you feel about pornography? Do you have particular kinds of pornography that you like? Where do you access pornography? How would this go? So we end up having like secrecy or surprises or feeling betrayed.
Yeah.
But it's often because we didn't talk about it.
For
right?
sure.
And
I had that conversation with my husband for the first time in Orgasm October because it was conversation, and we actually had such a mature conversation that it made me feel so good about it. And I'm like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Whereas like maybe 10 years ago, you know, you're in your early 20s and you're like, my boyfriend, oh my God, I looked at his phone. He's like watching all this porn. I feel so insecure. It's like an attack on me. Like I'm not doing something right.
Exactly.
And I can see how it could be, like you said, a hot button topic because it makes people insecure because the women on porn are usually don't look like me, you know? Or
it's a package thing. And so like I think it is like, so a big thing that we talk about with young people and with adults and with everybody is the idea of porn literacy. And that is the idea of like, let's talk about what porn is and what it isn't, right? So it's entertainment, not education, right? It's made for adults, not for anybody other than an adult, right? It's made, and then there's like niches and fetishes and different things that you might represent, and that's totally fine, but that's not for everyone, and that's okay, right? And so just sort of respecting that sometimes there's like fear and like different things that are attached to it that might not be true, right? And so sometimes that will feed into insecurity too. And I always just find it interesting that like we do fall into this comparison trap a lot where it's like, oh my God, my partner wants me to look like, you know, the chick in the porn that's doing the blowjob. And it's like, well, okay, but like you don't watch Mission Impossible and then think that, you know, you should jump out of airplanes. Like nobody.
That's a good
like, nobody does that.
Yeah,
right?
for
but
sure.
Somehow with porn, it's like, you know, and it could be because it's more vulnerable and it's naked and, you know, all that kind of stuff, right?
For sure.
But really, like when I talk to guys about porn.
Yeah,
right?
I'm curious about that.
And because I ask everybody.
Okay, tell me the dirt.
Tell me porn. What kind? Do you watch porn? How often do you watch porn? Do you always masturbate when you watch porn? What kind of porn do you like? I ask all these questions, and people are like, "Oh, okay, all right, let's go."
Whoa.
And it's great actually because again, it's just permission. They're like, "Oh, actually, I kind of like, you know, this," and I'm like, "Okay, that's cool."
Yeah.
Right? So that
like I've heard it all.
that's fine. Right? So I think discomfort with being able to talk about it. But guys often talk about the thing that they like, right? And this is what's been shared with me anyway: is seeing just women that love it. They're eager participants.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
So if you think of this dynamic of like duty sex and tolerating and all that kind of stuff, and then you watch a video and she's like, yeah, you know, like you're hot and I want to.
Right.
That's a nice
Woo-hoo.
That's a nice dynamic to observe.
Right,
And
right.
so that's actually the thing. It's not how big her boobs are or whatever, you know, the
But girls
aesthetic,
take it
right?
that way.
Yeah, we'll see
for
it
sure.
as aesthetic, right?
Yeah.
But for him, it's about having a willing and eager participant, you know, partner, right?
Like,
Who
I'll be
wants
honest,
to-
I've never watched porn and then thought, I wish my husband looked like that.
Yes,
like, never in my life.
exactly.
And only until I had that realization did I realize, he's fucking not doing that either.
No, it's really
He's
not.
like P and V, okay, get my rocks off, great, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about kink and sexual fantasies because I feel like that's a hot topic. So you mentioned online that you are kink friendly and affirming. So what does kink mean essentially?
Yeah, so kink we can see, you know, like being kinky, or we can say like BDSM types of things, right? So like, so that like sadomasochism, bondage, domination, submission, like those types of things. And so it can be lots of different things. So it can be, you know, leather and whips and chains and like those things that you think about, right? Thinking about a dominatrix in a movie, like that kind of thing. It can be like being tied up. It can be, you know, having a blindfold on. It can be, you know, so I think there's like a whole spectrum of things, right? That's like there's lots of folks that are going to bring in maybe a little bit of kinkiness into their relationship, even if they wouldn't necessarily identify themselves as kinky, right? I'm like,
what? Where does kink start and where does it stop?
Yeah, like again, it's a whole thing, right? So you might, in your very, you know, kind of that vanilla sort of thing is the term around. So you have pretty what you would consider to be normal and not very adventurous sex, say.
P&V missionary position sex.
Let's just get her done, and we do the same thing, and so, but maybe one day, you know, one of you wears a blindfold. Well, so that's kinky. Like that would count, right? Or one of you, you know, gets tied up to the bed, right? Like that kind of thing. So that would count. Like that counts as a kinky thing, right?
At what point are you like, that's not kinky, that's, can I say the word weird? Because like we're not, I don't know if we can put it.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing is that like it so for you, if that's like that's where your comfort level is, then someone else's, you might be like, whoa, like that's a lot, right? And I think pornography does a great job. If you start like digging into the world, you'll be like, oh my God, I didn't know.
Can you tell me some of those crazy non-vanilla things?
Like milking, that's one.
What? Like milking a woman?
Yeah.
Okay. Like when she's like actually lactating or just pretending?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, so you know, so it's a lot of kind of like rope tying and binding and squeezing of different body parts. Sometimes it's about putting different items into, you know, a vagina.
Like what kind of items?
Like a chain or
you know,
like bringing in some different things, you know. So like there's all kinds of things.
Toes?
So, and then we get into fetishes, right? And that's the thing is that like fetishes can be, you know, generally the idea of a fetish is that it's something that has to be present and it creates sexual arousal. So it's very common fetishes like feet, like high heels, like pantyhose, like things like that. Very common, but pretty much anything can be a fetish. If you Google fetishes, you'll find websites that have like a list of hundreds of them, and you're just like, oh, okay, that, you know, so there's lots of different options that way too. And so within my field we talk about like icks and yums, you know? So it's like you knowing your own yums and your own icks, and that's okay, but then we don't ick someone else's yum. Right.
So, unless it's like inhumane.
Yeah, unless it's like illegal.
Like
or it's
like an animal or
something.
something.
Like whoa, you know. So just like recognizing that. And again, I think there's a difference between like attraction or arousal and action. And those are two different things, right? So someone can say, as an example, be attracted to animals, doesn't mean you do anything with that.
Right.
Now, still, the idea that someone could be attracted to an animal might freak you out.
A little, that you said that, but that's okay.
But that's totally okay.
Staying open.
Right? Yeah, and that's okay. Like, if that freaks you out, then you're just like, okay, noted. That freaks me out. That's not something that's for me, and that's okay, right? But it is just sort of recognizing that there's a whole bunch of different ways that people express their sexuality, and most people feel shame, no matter how kind of freaky or more vanilla it is. People are like, oh god,
that must not be right.
That must not be right. Is that weird? I don't know. Like, have women that say, I watch porn, but it's like lesbian porn.
Oh yeah.
Am I a lesbian? I'm like, no, probably not. Like, I mean, maybe but but like, just because you watch lesbian porn doesn't mean you're a lesbian.
I actually heard that's a very common thing. I've talked to people, like other women, they're like, yeah, I watch lesbian porn. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
No penis at all?
Yeah. So it's just
people enjoying their sexuality. Women, I don't know. I don't think a penis is like the best thing to look at.
Right.
You know? Like, I'm not like, ooh,
pretty women enjoying themselves.
Exactly. Okay, so this might be a deep question. Obviously, it's different for what turns each person on, right? Different genders, different body types, races, different positions, smells, touch, whatever. Choking, spanking, outfits, whatever. Is that something that people are born with? Like, when they grow up, this is going to turn them on? Or is it hardwired? Or what the hell shapes that part of our brain to now be like, oh my god, she's wearing high heels, my dick's hard. Or like, oh my god, I like to milk someone. Like, where does the milking come from? You know? Like, is that something they're born with? Or is that something that comes from...
Yeah, it's a bit of both.
Okay.
You know, so the research tells us that we have something called an erotic template, and that is generally set before age 5. So there is stuff that's wired into us in terms of things that we just naturally feel like we're into, or like even just like a type of person you might be attracted to, right? Like, oh, I like people with dark hair, or I like people with this kind of body feature, or whatever. So some of those things, are set. Some of those things can be introduced, certainly. And so, an example I did in a training that just stuck with me, they talked about, like, your favorite uncle comes to visit, and he has a super fast, fun sports car, and he takes you for a ride every time he comes to visit you, and you're wearing shorts, and you're driving really fast, and you're feeling exhilarated, and your skin is touching the leather of the seats, right? And so now we have a little link between excitement and anticipation and leather. So now you're like, leather. Oh, right. And that might just like plant a little seed for later on, right? Okay. So sometimes we can add stuff. We generally can't take anything out. So once it's there, it's there.
And that's where the shame comes from.
And that's where shame can come from, right? Or like the, oh goodness, what's wrong with me?
Right.
Then the other thing that can impact this is when we unfortunately have abuse experiences in childhood, right? So if we have things, especially before that age 5, right, that they can kind of make their way into, your arousal template, your erotic template. And so then people are like, oh my goodness, right? And so then that's where sometimes we'll see people engaging in stuff that is like, again, like a reclaiming kind of thing, right? And so we see that in BDSM practices sometimes, where
they like to dominate because they've been dominated.
And that can be actually very healing, right? Or to be submissive, but consensually submissive, right? To allow yourself to be taken now safely, right? And you're calling the shots, because really, right, the dominant is not actually calling the shots.
Right.
Say forward.
Exactly,
right? You're like, this is what you're allowed to do, and this is what you're not allowed to do. We set this up ahead of time. So there is some healing that can then happen there too.
Okay, beautiful. So I wrote on here, like, if we went into Pornhub, for instance, they have all these categories, right? Like big tits, ass, small tits, Asian, orgy, solo male, lesbian. Like, where does all that diversity come from? So again, it's just your lived childhood experience / arousal template.
Yeah, like where you were born, what you were exposed to,
or your first sexual experience,
your first sexual experiences, your first crushes, your teacher that you loved, that when you were in elementary school, like all the different things that might come in. And then just different places. Google is kind of neat because Google has analytics, and you can actually like look up terms like frequency of search terms, and you can look at it like geographically too, right? To be like, oh, so everybody in Canada or everybody in Alberta, this is the most frequently looked for terms, versus like over in different places in the States. And so you can just see like commonalities, but also just diversity. It's kind of interesting.
Can you share? Like, do you know some of that data? Like, what are some of the search terms?
Not off the top of my head. It's super cool. But if you're interested, there's a book. It's called A Billion Wicked Thoughts, and I can't pronounce this man's last name because it's quite a last name, but you'll know it if you look up A Billion Wicked Thoughts. And it is literally a book that has done all this research based on all of this Google data. Cool. Super interesting. There's so much information, right? So
I don't know if you're allowed to share. Like, what have been any like kinks or fantasies that you've come across, not personally, but like in business, that you're like, oh wow, like that's different. No judgment on your part, but just like
Yeah.
what would be some examples of that?
Yeah, I think that
Milking?
that one was definitely where I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, like that's something
different.
I had not heard of before,
Yeah.
right? So, and that's part of the SAR experience is that they expose you to some of these things because you wouldn't know.
You wouldn't
right?
think
you
wouldn't
yeah.
think,
and then someone might come in and then you're not prepared, right? Or you might have like an initial like ooh kind of reaction. So so to be able to have some exposure to just having some knowledge of what's out there. But yeah, I think it is like, I mean, even like some of the rope tying stuff, I think is super cool and there's like an art form to it. But like I don't want, like, that would not be something I would want to do. Like I could think of it going, ow, that would be really painful and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But good for you. You know,
right.
If that works for you. So and yeah, some of the more like say rough, you know. So
I was gonna say like masochist.
Like,
is that the right word?
Yeah. So and some of like the rough sex and sometimes what we call consensual non-consent, which is like rape fantasies and things like that.
Wow. For the person getting it, like receiving.
Yeah. So that is a thing that exists. And again, for some people, actually is part of healing and part of a reclaiming kind of process. And also just the idea of being able to you know, kind of like be taken.
Yeah.
Right? The idea of like throw me over your shoulder and take me.
Right.
And there's something hot about that, right?
Okay.
And
I'm like, yeah, now that you say it,
like,
sure.
Actually, yeah. And so that's a really common fantasy.
As long as it's on my terms, yes,
exactly.
100%.
And that's the thing is that with this kind of stuff, gotta have really good communication. So we're talking about it, we're setting up the parameters, we have a safe word, we have all those things. So I think the strengths of folks in the kink and BDSM community is they have stellar communication.
Right. You have to.
Like you have to, right? And that's, I think, something that like a lot of folks that aren't in that community aren't doing, right? And I think we can learn.
They know something we don't know right now.
100%.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to know what's next for you, Erin. So I saw online you're creating a healthy sexuality group for women here in Lethbridge. So you are from Lethbridge.
Yes.
What goes on in a therapeutic group like that? And can you tell the audience about what this entails? And if you have room, like you can sell it a little bit. Tell us. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So I'm going to be offering this group with a colleague of mine. Her name is Kate LaRock, and she is a fellow. She's a Canadian certified counselor here in Lethbridge as well, and she's a certified sexologist, so she has a background also in working with sexuality. And so it's an online group because we wanted to open it up to women across Alberta. So because I'm registered in Alberta, I can only work with people in Alberta, so that's the limit.
It's good. We got lots of podcast listeners not from Lethbridge.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like anywhere in Alberta.
Yeah.
And so it'll be virtual. It's 8 weeks, and it's every Thursday for 2 hours, and we're hoping to start it March 7th.
Okay.
And I can do direct billing through benefits, and then Kate is a provider with the city of Lethbridge. So if you are from Lethbridge, you might be able to get like subsidy through the city to be able to attend as well. So if it's cost prohibitive, so trying to make it accessible. And it's going to be a collection of a bit of some learning and some teaching. We're using mindfulness a lot, so we'll be doing lots of like guided meditations, mindfulness. There'll be some homework, some different kind of self practice kinds of things.
Okay.
There's a Canadian psychologist from BC. Her name is Lori Brotto, and she's written a lovely book about mindfulness and sex. And so some of her work we're bringing in to inform and teach as well. So so it's the first time we've offered it. And
So who would be really good for if people are listening and they're like, ooh, I need to join that?
Yeah, so we really try to capture like people that have a bunch of different experiences. So it might be that that you have had painful sex. Maybe you've gone through pelvic floor physio and you're like, oh, okay, like I want to try to figure out how to like get into this now and have it be a good time, right? Or maybe you're experiencing low desire. Maybe you're really uncomfortable with your body. Maybe you've never had an orgasm. Like maybe pleasure is just like you're kind of like, why sex? Like I don't really get it. Like what's the point? Right. So various ages and stages. So women in their 20s and 30s, but maybe women that are more like in hormonal changes, 40s and 50s. Like so we really want to try to catch lots of women in different parts of their journey, because I think a lot of the common threads can
will they have to talk?
They can definitely share as much or as little as they want. And we definitely have said like if cameras off feels better for you, that's fine. If you don't want to use your real name on the screen, that's totally fine too. So just really like respecting people's like privacy and just getting them feeling like they're ready to reflect and share as much as they want to. Yeah.
Okay, so lastly then, what's next for you, Erin, in business and in life? Because I know you also do yoga. I don't know if you're currently doing that. Are you currently taking clients? Kind of give our audience a download on what we can expect from you.
For sure. So I co-own a practice downtown, Lethbridge Counseling Services, with two of my lovely friends and colleagues. So that's where my therapeutic practice is. I'm waitlisted right now, so I do have some folks sitting on my wait list. So it'll be a few months, but it's open right right now. So generally I cap it when I get 6 people on there because it feels like it's way too long.
Right,
so I
right.
try not to do that. So so I have I think 3 people on my wait list right now. So that is an option. Group is coming up, and then I have just started my the sextherapistyogi.com website, and so on there, kind of aspirations for content development for sure,
Yes.
in the way of more professional development for lay people and professionals, like that kind of thing. I like doing, I like teaching a lot, so
Yes.
I do teach on like how to be a sex positive therapist, or cycle syncing and the hormone stuff, and like all that.
Like,
kind
I need
of
you
stuff.
back for that part.
We're gonna talk about it.
Yes.
So all that kind of stuff, and then starting to build a yoga platform as well. So
Amazing.
I don't have my own studio anymore, but I will be doing some pop-ups and some just
Yay.
offerings out in the community, and then eventually a video library when I get it all
Yay.
built.
Well, I saw
So-
maybe you were looking at doing some courses also was on your website, so that's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah,
You're a
definitely.
teacher.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you drop your Instagram handle or the best way to connect with you to the audience? I'll also
Yeah.
link it in the show notes.
For sure. Yeah, probably Instagram. Like, I do have Instagram and Facebook, but I think Instagram is probably the best way. So that I'm just the sex therapist yogi on there, and
Awesome.
then my website is sextherapistyogi.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. You shared so much with us. I am just elated. And thank you, everybody, for listening and for joining us on another episode of the Authentically Ashlyn podcast. And we will check you next week for the next one. Ciao! Look at us. We were right on schedule.
Perfect.
Nailed
Yeah,
it.
that's awesome.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. You did awesome.
All right, thank you.
You could just talk for ages, hey? Like, I never know when I'm, like, so I talk to someone usually
Right.
texting, and I'm like,
Right.
I hope that...